Okay, thanks, Bridget. Thanks for the intro. I've got my Dr. Heidi Nicholl up there. I am Associate Professor Nicholl as well. I just use them like where it's useful. I only really use Associate Professor when I'm involved in actual research, but I thought I would mention that. I want to pick up on what Brittany said about work-life balance. Really good advice there. And I think when Brittany said it, I sort of thought work-life balance, ha ha ha, yeah, it's aspirational, but none of us manage it. And I know that probably a lot of PhD students or people working all the hours in the lab have probably sort of had that same reaction. But then I did think about it and I thought, when Brittany was saying boundaries as well, I actually have developed good boundaries over the years. I have almost nothing that goes to my phone. Very few people have my personal phone number. There are ways that I've built in my protections that are important to me and my sort of family life and balance. And it's different for different people. So yeah, I think I would echo that. I think it was a really good point that I didn't have in this preparation. I also negotiated 7 weeks of holidays in lieu of a pay rise, because in the sort of work that I do, burnout is very common, and the work can be hard, especially in my previous job, which was at Emerge Australia, which is working with people with a chronic health condition, and it could be very difficult and very stressful. Okay, so here is the presentation that I've done. I've got my 20 minutes, going to try and keep my eye on the time. The last thing I'm going to pick up from what Brittany said was that, as she said, hers is a very corporate type of role and 90% of her time is spent at work. And I think that echoes really nicely with this slide being me, not so much. So here is a little snapshot, all taken within the last couple of years, and this picture with the lovely Tim Minchin in St Kilda was taken a couple of weeks ago. So this is me and Tim Minchin, who is a supporter of Humanists Australia. The picture in the middle is me at an Emerge Australia conference in a very involved conversation with a robot. This was actually part of a program that we were doing in order to try and help homebound school children so that they could stay engaged at school. And we were demoing these robots at a very big international conference that we put on about myalgic encephalomyelitis and chronic fatigue syndrome. And then on the right hand side of the room, you can see my little Emerge Australia leaflet on the table and my bright pink clipboard. You can see pink is a theme for me on this. And that's me meeting Bill Shorten, talking about NDIS issues at Parliament House in Australia, which periodically is a large part of my work. So to give you a sort of idea of what my day job is like, simultaneously with being on here, I'm listening to speakers and I'm really thrilled to be here and to be a part of this. I'm also really obsessed with my e-news that went out. And there was a feature about Humanists Australia, the charity that I currently am CEO of. There was a feature about us in The Guardian a few weeks ago, and our subscriber list increased drastically. And the Tim Minchin also mentioned us in a Facebook, Twitter and Instagram post less than a week ago, and that's led to a big increase in subscribers as well. So I'm really watching our e-news. I'm doing an A/B test of subject lines to see which one gets opened. One's called e-news 5th of August. I know, really super exciting. The other one is called Religiosity in Australia, Bruce Pascoe and Humanist Futurism. So this kind of just splitting subject lines and that sort of granularity and the minutiae for an e-news. Obviously, I've worked with a comms specialist to put together the e-news, one of my team members. I'm also editing a brand magazine in the background because we're on a deadline for that. We're working on a new layout. On Monday, I'm going through the strategic plan that I'm in the process of presenting to my board to make sure I get board buy-in, and that's our sort of 3-year plan, looking at developing a celebrant program, chaplaincy, community growth, all of those things, the strategic plan. So this is sort of my day job right now. But one thing I want to just mention, I sort of put Tim Minchin on here for a reason, not because he's cool, although he is cool and I quite like the picture. But I think that there's something here which is a really good example, because it looks like it's all fun and games, right? But I had to work so hard to get to Tim Minchin. Okay, so I had to use all of my networking. I had to go through so many stages of impressing people, being good to people, assuring people, reassuring people. And throughout every step of this process, I had to be on the top of my game. I liken it to, I did part of my PhD at Yale. And getting into the Yale Bioethics Centre as a visiting researcher, it's the same process as getting to Tim Minchin. Every single step is the idiot detector test. And if you do something stupid, they say, well, thank you for your time and we'll get in touch, and you know it's over. So with Tim Minchin, when the call finally came, well, actually it was a text message from Tim. Somebody had, passed on my phone number and blah, blah, blah. And I was waiting to hopefully to meet up with him. I was expecting something to go in the diary. I'd been hoping to hear from the man for about a week. And when the text message finally came through, I had 45 minutes notice, and I was having a single recovery day after general anesthesia and surgery, which is why I look a bit pale in the photograph. And of course, I didn't say that to Tim. I just went, yeah, of course. And I jumped out of bed, threw those orange earrings on to try and perk myself up a bit, and just jumped in the car and went. So that sort of gives you an idea that it is fun and games, and I am incredibly privileged, and spending 90 minutes having Japanese pancakes with Tim is a privilege, and I love my job. But yeah, it's also it's difficult. Okay, so I think the other thing I was going to say, Humanists Australia, it's a very new organisation. The previous job at Emerge Australia, to give you an idea of the sorts of budget and work that I do. I agree with my last job. When I went in, there was $200,000 in the bank. We had a budget of spending about $150,000, $180,000 a year. There were 3 part-time staff. Within the 3 years that I did the job, I'd grown it to $1 million a year annual budget. By year 2, we were on an annual budget of about 800,000. We've stabilized at about $1 million a year annual budget. When I left the organisation, there was $1.7 million in the bank, and we had about 15 staff. So that's the sort of growth trajectory that I've been doing. Now, how did I get here? Okay, so in my 20s, I was, let me get my my notes. In my 20s, so I was a research scientist. I specialised in molecular and developmental biology, and neuroscience was a focus for me. I did a zoology degree at Imperial College originally, and then I basically did a whistle-stop tour through the evolutionary ladder. I started work on cancer cell lines. I went through to DICT. I worked on zebrafish, and I ended up on human fetuses, which is where the developmental biology came in. Now, I like to think I'm a smart person, but for me, looking at PhD opportunities and looking at those research projects, it wasn't the thing that really jazzed me. So the science and the research hypotheses and all of that, I can do it. I was interested, I would get interested, but it's not really my thing. What my thing was I was the one that would organise things, I would manage things, I would audit things, I was the one that would coordinate lab moves. I'd be pulled in from different labs because I was the person that had the reputation of managing to get all of the things, order the boxes, get the things, sending tropical fish from London to East Germany and getting all their licenses, etc. That was my jam. So the person that I am is really that organising systems, record keeping, and making things function optimally. So that's how I spent my 20s. I was mostly a lab technician, and I went up through the lab technician sort of grades, and I ended up taking over as manager of the human developmental biology resource, which I'll talk more about later. I then did a PhD in medical ethics. So I knew I needed the PhD. I knew that my career was being limited by not having a PhD, but I wasn't really 100% sure where I was going. So in terms of this career plan, it's not been much of a plan. I had a vague idea that I might do some postdocing. I knew that there was a need for ethicists who started with science and added philosophy. I'd really noticed there was a thing where people who did ethics and were being a commentator about ethics and science had done philosophy or done ethics, and then sort of read up on the science to become an expert in philosophy of science. And it just used to bug me with my, okay, I wasn't a PhD scientist per se, but I'd done my sort of 10 years or so in hard science. And I just sort of saw that there was this need for people that got the science, but could then learn the ethics and philosophy. I also got very involved in competitive sport during my PhD, and my PhD was on the morality. It was a secular bioethical analysis of the morality of abortion. So I like to say something really straightforward and easy to fix. And that last job as manager of the human developmental biology resource was actually very challenging because I was working with fetal material and human remains. I found, again, it's that work-life balance, and I needed to stop and do something else. And I got very involved in archery. So that was my sport. I only started it in my PhD. I started as an archer when I was about 28, 29 years old. I also volunteered at a nonprofit that was sort of related. It was something I was interested in. There was a bit of crossover, and it was sort of useful for networking. It was the closest thing I could find, basically. It wasn't super aligned, but it was in the right sort of ballpark. I did a lot of networking. I was a student liaison person that did lots. I helped in fundraising. I helped in all the student offices, and I absolutely loved that. And I got lots of work because I was that little bit older, and I knew that I could present myself well, and I just loved it. And I did so many fun things as that. And then you'll notice in year 3, I decided that my career was over and I was entirely unemployable. So I don't know if anyone can identify with that, but I definitely went through that. So in my 30s, having decided that I was unemployable and my career was over, what I did was I was sort of, my goal, my idea was, well, I'll keep going with archery. I'm competitive. I was sort of state level, winning low level things, making the team, but not really progressing. And I had this idea that I would also be an academic because I'd got my PhD, and that was what I thought I would do afterwards, is this sort of vague postdocing and, you know, maybe one day be head of department or whatever. But what actually happened was I ended up, the academia turned into teaching and the sport turned into business. So with my archery, with the sport piece, I ended up realizing that I didn't want to go to elite levels. Either my talent wasn't good enough or my work ethic on competitive sport. I just didn't want to do it. And I looked at people that had just made the national team. My coach made the national team as I made the state team. And it just didn't look like the fun that well, we all know it's not really fun, right? So it takes a toll on your body. So I got involved in coaching. My coaching was very successful. I had a very specific approach to it. I was a young woman. There weren't too many young women doing it. And basically I got overwhelmed with people wanting my coaching and had to emergency hire 2 or 3 other people. And I taught them how I coached. And that seeded the business that I ran through my 30s. I'm still a business owner today. And the academia, I got picked up by my university where I'd done my PhD. I got picked up to do some teaching for ethics and law. And I also got hired at UCL Medical School as part of their ethics and law team. And I basically spent 8 years. I ended up with a full lectureship at one place, and I ended up as responsible for, and it's a real mouthful for job titles, I was the lead for clinical year 2 in the ethics and law team in the UCL Medical School. So I'd sort of gone up to where I'd gone up to, but it still wasn't really making sense. I moved to the US. I married an American, and I moved to the US probably because I just really didn't have much of a plan. And over there, I continued to work on business development, and that was quite successful in America, but I just wasn't really happy. And then I thought I'd try and continue do something better with my ethics, and I got a fellowship in clinical neuroethics. So I sort of had these 2 parallel strands going on. Then in my 40s, so at the sort of end of the American period, I went back over to Yale, to the Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics, where I had been a visiting researcher in my PhD, and I kept my links there as part of the networking, kept my links, kept checking in. And somebody was unable to teach a course on feminist bioethics, and they asked me to do it because my PhD subject was all about abortion, and I'd been lead for clinical year 2, which was women's health and child health. So I said yes, because it's Yale, and if you're going to go and do some teaching anywhere, you're going to say yes to go and do some teaching at Yale. It's never going to be a career fail. And I went over there and I met an Australian. So I met my Australian, as I say, my career, I just didn't really know where I was. My marriage had ended, and I said, you know what, I'll come over to Australia, let's give it a go. And then this is the sort of career bit, is I think what I'm trying to sort of convey here is, in my 30s, in my 20s, I did science and I went off and I got to my PhD. In my 30s, I'd either pursued the ethics strand or the sport and business opportunities. And when I got to Australia, I thought, do you know what I really need to do now is find some way of consolidating the whole thing by combining a single CV that brought these things together. So the end result was using my ethics, and that's the justice and the harm lens from my medical ethics, the knowledge of health derived from those hospital jobs, like being a clinical neuroethicist in San Francisco, and my small business management skills. And I went into Emerge Australia, which was at the time a small membership organisation with 3 part-time staff. And I sort of brought together all of those things that I'd done and the things that I knew. So heading towards wrapping up, because I've got 5 minutes left, what I've sort of wanted to smash together then from this sort of whistle-stop tour through my career is, what were my skills for the non-profit leadership? What had I developed as I went through? And I think the first sort of overarching thing for me really is that networking. And I was really pleased to see that a lot of this crosses over with what Brittany said as well. So she's ended up as a patent attorney, and here am I as a, you know, totally non-corporate, scruffy, non-profit CEO, but a lot of the same skills, just a different direction. So networking, first of all, super important. I couldn't do my job without being a good networker. Management on the left-hand side. So initially this was derived from me managing the human developmental biology resource, the tissue bank. That's where I really first got that title as a manager, and that was helpful. Self-motivation, my PhD, I worked entirely alone. I worked from home, and they tried to give me a desk once, and it was the day before the London bombs went off on July the 7th back in 2006, and I never went back to the desk. So I did the whole thing self-motivated on my own. Public speaking. The confidence from the years of teaching, the lecturing, small group facilitation, all of those different skill sets. So from small group facilitation of, you know, 10 medical students in a small group, up to 300 people in the Great Hall at City University in the nursing and midwifery program, and everything split in between. It gave me the confidence to speak in public, and the skill and the experience. I've also got expertise on here because something that I've done through my career is I have consecutively gained expertise in different areas. So I have some expertise rapidly declining in biology. Probably the same with archery, rapidly declining expertise, but I can still explain the Olympics to you. I gained expertise in assisted suicide, which is back on my agenda here at Humanists Australia. Had expertise in NICU issues, the US health system, etc. So I understand how to consecutively acquire and develop expertise. And then I have writing, which I know Brittany mentioned as well. And this is somewhat throughout, but specifically I got it through my non-profit volunteering during my PhD, through writing my PhD. I published an opinion piece in The Age a couple of weeks ago. I'm editing our brand magazine. It's key to my job. And then I think I put in a really esoteric thing as well, sort of on my notes for this. The first proper manager job that I got as HDBR, for me, I had to address my appearance. Okay, so I tend to be a bit scruffy. I used to have a lot of piercings. I had tattoos. And at the time I looked young. I was slight, I was skinny, I had these piercings, these tattoos, whatever. And I realized that I wasn't getting the jobs because of what I looked like. And I don't know, it may not apply to anybody listening to this or here today, but if it does, I just sort of want to say, look, I had to go through that, and I really want to be my authentic self, and I love having a job where I can be my authentic self, but at times I've had to fake it to make it. So just in case anyone needed to hear that today, that was my experience. So last 2 minutes, how you can get started if you're interested in doing what I have done. A couple of things that I think would be really worthwhile to do, and obviously I can answer Q&A about this later as well. All boards need youth board members, and a youth board member can be anyone sort of up to 35, and in some cases up to 70. So some boards are very old. So we all love youth board members. Now I have to say, I don't need a youth board member. I actually need people outside Victoria at the moment for my board growth, but there are many opportunities on pro bono jobs where non-profit boards might be looking for new board members. If they have a science persuasion, then it may be something that you could help with. You could ask to sit in on a board meeting. It might maybe something that you could do for a non-profit in an area that you're interested in. Volunteering at non-profits, science comms, you know, you have skills that will help in many non-profits. And I think it's what you need to do is you need to go in and say, how can I help? And I think I have something at the end. I think that I had something about identify a place where they may need help. So writing and science comms is something where people often need help, but don't go to them saying, hey, I've found this gap in your services or whatever. Look and see, do they have a skilled volley program, and see how, you know, where would you fit in things that they're already doing, and you go to them and you say, how can I help? So I think those if you get those two things, it's really, really helpful. And then just again, to address that other elephant in the room, what I really want to be when I grow up, okay, I'm not doing what I really want to be when I grow up. I want to be a writer. I want to find the time to write. It's something that's still in my future. I haven't by any stretch got it all sorted, but I'm getting it lined up to where I want to be, and I'm very, very lucky with the opportunities that I've had, and thank you for inviting me here today.